Hi, curious friend. Welcome to Building Your Best Brain podcast. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not new here, you know that this is episode number 4, all about fear and your brain. So I invite you to listen to the other episodes, not that you need them to be able to understand what we're unpacking here, but we've been building up this fear, this fear in your brain cake together. And this is going to be, my sense is that this is going to be the final tier for now. And it's going to be all about around your frustrations when it comes to your fears and insecurities. So when you notice that a fear is resurfacing, maybe it's a common one that has popped up more than once. And again, a fear is anything that is threatening to you. So whether that's a worry, an insecurity, a like classic fear that feels threatening, that when you notice it coming up, that you begin to feel even more frustrated and even more in fear or insecure about that fear or insecurity coming up. And if you've ever felt like this before, you're definitely not alone. And sometimes I've referred to this as a bit of a stress spiral or a fear spiral, right? So you notice the fear coming up, it leads you to fear the fear or be insecure about the insecurity, and you end up really at the bottom of this like emotional, energetic, depleted puddle. And so, what I want to unpack today is what exactly is happening at the level of your brain and how is this impacting your life in general. And so, if you have listened to me before, you may know a bit about my story, but a big part of my story that led me to explore this work of stress regulation, the brain, your brain's ability to be rewired for ultimate resilience, dates back, I mean, before my master's, but a big part of it is the burnout that I experienced in my master's. So, a really big theme there was that I was overworking. I was working like 14 to 18-hour days every day, drinking lots of coffee, smoking cigarettes, all towards the goal of publishing a paper in my master's. And really, once I was better and in a more balanced place, I was able to unpack the why underneath all that, which was around my fear of not being smart enough or my fear of not being successful. And so this was all kind of an overcompensation. But in an extreme way, it led me, and I won't go into all the details, but it led me to the psychiatrist's office with the diagnosis of bipolar type 2, which the mania is not as high. So if you don't know, bipolar is a mood disorder that is characterized by swinging between really low depressive episodes and really high mania episodes where you have lots of energy, your risk behavior is really high. And so, I did have genetic predispositions to this, and that added with stress led me to the burnout I experienced in my master's. So I was very aware by the time I finished my master's and stopped ghosting my therapist that me overworking was a response to that fear. And so after my master's, I was working in a coffee shop for a little bit, trying to figure out my next move. And I got a job in a biotech company. And during that time, I was still kind of fiddling around with what does a work-life balance mean for me at this stage of my life? And there would be times that I would overwork. And I remember there was a specific time I worked in this company for over 2 years where I had kind of grown out of the position I was in, and they were gearing up and exploring giving me a promotion, but the promotion hadn't happened yet. And they gave me this small project, which was almost like a test to see if I could join a more scientific role. So the role I was in before was super interesting. I was a coordinator role. So I got to see a lot of the company, I got to talk to lots of people, but I didn't have a lot of my own scientific projects and questions. And that really kind of ignited the not feeling smart enough why underneath my overworking. And so they gave me a little science project, a question just for me. And we took turns as a company giving presentations to the entire company. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking in and of itself. And the presentation that I gave was on this small project. And so, needless to say, I put a lot of pressure on myself and I got into that space of overworking where I was working on this presentation after hours. I was working on it on the weekend, late nights. There was no cigarettes at the time because luckily, or not luckily, and that's a whole other side tangent, I stopped smoking. Monday rolls around, the presentation is later that day, and my boss tells me that the other person, because there's always two people presenting, was not feeling prepared and they're going to reschedule it for the following week. And I remember being crushed because I felt ready. I had all this like jacked up cortisol, right? That kind of anticipation, right? That prep. And I was crushed. And when I noticed that I was crushed, I realized that the part of the reason why I was crushed was because I did all those behaviors that I was doing in my master's, right? This overworking, pushing myself, this overcompensation. And I got into a mini depression. I say mini because depression has a clear diagnosis, right? And I was on medication at the time to manage my bipolar. I was on a mood stabilizer. But I say mini because it didn't last very long and I was able to get out of it. So I don't want to take away from anybody that has a clinical depression diagnosis because I know personally how difficult that is. But I did get into a slump and I was starting to beat myself up at the fact that I had spent my entire weekend working on this presentation and that I was, regressing and going back to old patterns. And, it meant that was defective, that I wasn't making any momentum forward. And how could I let this happen? And what's interesting about this is that in that beating myself up about overworking, I'm spending energy that my body is desperately telling me not to spend. I'm completely resisting the healing that my body is asking for, the rest that my body is asking for. And by getting frustrated, I get this almost double whammy of my stress response, right? So I get my first stress response by engaging in that old pattern, right? So I perceive this presentation as being super important and urgent, and I have to do this super well in order to get the promotion, of course, to feel like I'm smart and worth it and successful. I do all that. Cortisol is spent. My body is tired. And then once I realize that that happened and my body is tired, I'm not giving it the rest that it's literally asking for because I'm busy beating myself up over the fact that it happened. Another example of how this happens, especially if you're in relationship and you've been in relationship with somebody for a while, is having the same I feel you guys are gonna love this. Having the same reoccurring fight. Now, the partner that I'm with currently we've been together for almost 3 years, and it's the healthiest relationship that I've been in so far. And the other relationships I wasn't even in long enough to have fights that were reoccurring. They were just fights that ended and then we broke up. So if you are in a longer relationship and you have reoccurring fights, I just want to say celebrating the fact that you haven't broken up and quit is great. But it's easy to get into that feeling of when the fight is reoccurring, the same problem is showing up, that you guys aren't making momentum and that you're not regulating or moving forward or there's no improvement and that you could have done better or they could have done better, right? The whole team could have done better. And you can get into this space where even if the fight is relatively innocuous meaning that is something really small, right? Like let's say, you decide to separate chores and you forget to do your chore or your partner forgets to do their chore and you fight about the fact that they haven't done their chore or you feel some type of way about how they haven't done their chore. Truly not life or death things, but what happens is when you get frustrated about the fact that the fight is reoccurring, again, whether you are being critical of them, but in particular when you're being critical of yourself, you basically end up having two fights. You're fighting them, and then you're also fighting yourself. So you get a very similar kind of situation as before, where you get this double whammy effect on your nervous system, where you're having all this firing and cortisol related to the threatening stressor ahead, as well as the threat of the fact that you're threatened. I know this sounds meta, but I'm going to begin to dive into what that looks like at the level of your brain and how it impacts your life. And so, like I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, it's really the way your stress response works is quite simple, right? You need to be confronted by a stressor. And a stressor is something that is threatening and is threatening to your survival. And of course, the definition of our survival in this day and age is quite different than what it was many, many moons ago, right? So, what happens is when you start noticing patterns coming up again, problems coming up again, you dealing with your stressors the same way you did before that you particularly don't like, you start seeing your fear, your insecurity, or your worry as threatening in it of itself. Let me try that again because that was a lot of ins and its, and I don't know if I got the right order. In it of itself, that threat, that insecurity, that worry, in it of itself is a stressor, is threatening. And that's where the double whammy comes in. And that's where if you feel really triggered during those moments where you recognize that fear and insecurity, you're likely tipping over into either just exacerbating your stress, so your stress response continues, or you get into a different kind of stress response, which is more of a panic. So we call it kind of slow response and fast response. There's a whole neurobiology kind of cascade that's different between the two. A few is that your slow response is related to the release of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And it's associated with a slow release over hours and days. And so it's a bit more of a slow buildup. Whereas your fast response, which can happen within seconds, is associated with noradrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And those effects can be more immediate. So they're often more associated with panic. So you either just have an increase in cortisol or you kind of switch over into panic because you're threatened by the threat of the threat. And this takes a lot of your brain and your body's energy, right? Because all of these hormones and neurotransmitters, they act on your body and your brain, and they're basically demanding it to behave a certain way, right? To have everything kind of shift in a certain direction, as well as release energy to be spent to confront that stressor and threat. Now, I can completely understand why we would get this double whammy effect. Especially, I find this happens a lot with people that are very motivated to change. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's why I wanted to make this episode because people that are motivated to change, right, that are basically not allowing themselves to be victims to circumstance, recognizing that change happens from within, and that change from within can help with the change in your external environment. You're motivated, you're smart, you're curious. Often people get stuck here, right? Because how could you not when you are getting increased awareness about your fear, which is great. I'll link below in the show notes the episodes where I talk about that. I talk about that a bit in Fear and Attention and the structures involved. But then you get hit again with your stress response once you find this awareness. And that can almost set you backwards with how much energy you're spending on that. So, how do we move forward? How do we shift this in a way so that we're feeling like we're gaining momentum forward in our rewiring journey of shifting these fears, insecurities, and worries in a way that can actually help our brains move forward towards our goals? Are you ready for the alternative? The alternative is to see how your fears, insecurities, worries, how they benefit you, which I know sounds ridiculous and crazy, but it really, really works. And I'll link it in the show notes, an episode where I dive into this in depth. But in short, during my PhD, which I'm in my knocking on wood final year of completing, there was a paper that my supervisor and I submitted. It's a first author paper. It's pretty important in your PhD to publish papers, but every program is a bit different in terms of requirements. And the process of this was going really well. You know, we submitted it, we got revisions right away, which is where, excuse me, editors of the paper make requests in terms of changing the text as well as adding more experiments. And a little indigestion there. Maybe I'm not as okay with it as I thought. Kidding. And we send it back. They looked at it, they said everything looks great, you can publish as is. And so this process, which we call the reviewers and the revision process, takes, anywhere between 4 to 8 months. And then after that, the editorial process, which is where the journal will make small requests around formatting and all that sort of thing. Maybe ask for some additional documents. It's nothing scientific that they're asking for. It's truly formatting, administrative, kind of checking all the boxes. That can take a few weeks to a few months. This process was taking months to the point that, my supervisor was getting involved and they were asking for really particular small things. They were taking a long time getting back to us. They actually made a claim or suggested that we plagiarized a part of it, but it was actually an error, an AI error. Because they were like, you plagiarized this thesis, and the thesis was on a completely different topic. And I was like, what the are you talking about? And I got to the point where I was getting really scared that this paper was not going to be published in this journal. And we were getting to the point where we were getting on like 6, 7 months, right? And we're talking about maybe resubmitting it to another journal, which of course can take another year and is like another whole process. And I was getting really scared that the paper wasn't going to get published. And when I looked underneath that fear, I also thought that it would maybe impact me finishing my PhD. And when I looked underneath that, I was like, that could impact my ability to feel successful and smart, right? Like all very similar themes. Once you unpack and kind of figure out the why underneath some of your fears, it's often, and I call this the core stress circuit, you often only have 2 or 3 fears and insecurities that kind of tie into many areas of your life. And so what I did, because I was like, I can't keep feeling this stress response every time I open an email, every time that they delay or don't get back to us. Like, I can't keep feeling frustrated. This is not helping me move forward. And I looked at how it was perfect if the paper didn't get published, how it was perfect if after 4 years, crazy, I know, 4 years of working on my PhD, it would be perfect if I just dropped out and didn't finish it. And what this did for me was a few things. One is because I like to call it being neutralized, because it was neutralized in my brain, The topic in itself did not elicit the same degree of stress anymore. This meant that I had a lot more energy to spend on literally everything else, right? Things that make me feel more regulated, things that make me feel more full, focusing on the things that I could control, right? So doing the experiments, the remaining experiments, the writing to finish my thesis and doing it in a way that was a lot more productive, right? Because I was able to better focus. A big part of brain fog for people is often, and we don't always know this, is often linked to a stress response because you've expended all of your brain's, well, not all, but a lot of your brain's glucose and energy stores, which leaves you with nothing, right? So then good luck trying to pay attention and be productive and feel like you're moving forward and even actually moving forward. And so neutralizing that, I was able to regulate myself more. I was able to have a lot more energy, which was fantastic. And and there's more details in that episode, which I'll put at the bottom of the show notes. The paper did get published less than a month after I did this exercise. And it was crazy. They were not responding to us. We were threatening to pull the journal. We're threatening to pull the article from this journal. They were saying, like it's okay, we understand. And we're like, what is happening? And then all of a sudden, a senior editor finally got back to us and stuff started moving really, really fast. And what's interesting is that once your brain starts building up this evidence, like once you start doing for it once, it's really easy to start doing again for everything. It's almost addictive. And in my PhD now, I'm on track to finish this summer 2026. And as I was wrapping up experiments for my thesis, my supervisor said, "Hey, this looks like it could be a second paper," which is, of course, some people write dream come true, other people, and I felt a bit of both. I was like, I don't want a second paper. I want to graduate. And so I am working towards the second paper, but I have these limitations in terms of time, right? And biology is extremely unpredictable. And I, again, neutralize the fact that the second paper might not happen. I might not be able to have enough time to do it. And it has nothing to do with my intelligence. This has nothing to do with my success. And by seeing this benefit, like digging into the fear of like, what are the positives if this paper doesn't get published? What are the positives if I don't finish my PhD at this stage? Gives me so much more energy. Gives me so much more energy that everything I'm doing, PhD wise, experiment wise, I only have to do once because I'm not distracted, because I'm not focused, because I'm not making silly little mistakes, because I'm exhausted and depleted. And so the challenge for you guys is when you notice your fears and insecurities and worries coming up, particularly the ones that are a common pattern that you're really well aware of, I want you to start asking, how is this fear, worry, insecurity a benefit for you? What are some positives when it comes to it? And you likely won't feel great after this exercise. This is not like a toxic positivity exercise where you kind of pretend to feel really great. Don't shoot the messenger. But it will help take that stress edge off of it. And you really start to notice over time that the momentum, a really great momentum energy wise, builds from doing this kind of exercise. So when you notice it comes up, see if you can start to ask, what are the benefits of it? I'm very excited that you guys stuck with me throughout this entire fear month, that you were not scared and that you did it. You were invested, you listened. So I invite you to listen again, pick and choose one tool to test and explore. And as always, you can find me on synaptic.sylvie, Instagram, TikTok, now also on Rumble, which is cool. You guys check out Rumble because the videos I'm putting there are a bit longer, so it's a bit more in depth, which is nice. And You can always DM me on those platforms, direct message. You can always comment here, any questions, especially when it comes to application. And now I'm excited to share that there's going to be free weekly webinars. And these webinars are designed to help with the application of this information because I find that is the hardest part in this world that is very information heavy, where it's hard to know if the information is one, true, if it's facts, and two, everybody's different. Everybody's on a different part of their journey. Everybody has different experiences, perspectives, has tried different things. So, not every tidbit of information or every tool is actually going to work for every individual person. And so these webinars are designed as basically a Q&A for the topics that we cover in the podcast. So next week, which is going to be, let me pull up my calendar. We're in March now, March 2026, which is pretty bananas. This is going to be the week of March 16th. There's going to be a 30-40 minute free webinar all on Q&As related to fear and your brain. So if you want to not miss that, it's going to be on Zoom and you can sign up for an email reminder. The link is a jot form in the show notes. Depending on where you're listening, it's either hyperlinked and you can just press it, or you may have to copy paste it. And if you can't make that time, you can submit your question online. You can reply to me via email and it will be answered during the Q&A. Priority will be for people that are in person. I put in quotations because it's virtual, but in person live, because we can have a bit more of a back and forth and I can make sure people really understand. But I do encourage you to send your questions because this is a great way for us to also be accountable to each other. And a part of the reason why I wanted to do these free webinars is because application is hard, personalization is hard on these platforms, and accountability is hard. It is so hard to apply what we learn. It is not easy. And so you, of course, get to interact with me, but you'll also see other people in this space. And you can be buddies for each other to be accountable for these tools or changes. And it's a great way for us to learn and build momentum together. So you can check that in the show notes. And we're going to come on to a new topic. I have no idea what it's going to be yet. I am taking suggestions, but sorry, my laundry, I don't know if you hear that, is letting me know it's ready. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a new era of the podcast and I'm looking forward to meeting you guys live. And I'm wishing you a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much for your attention and your brain energy. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how this is all landing and how this is impacting your life as a whole. Until next time, bye.